There's actually a lot of truth to this, and people don't realize it. So basically, the modernized police force that we have today is a combination of two different systems. In the South, they were the slave patrols, whose job was to enforce white supremacy and catch enslaved or escaped enslaved black people and prevent revolts and police black bodies. Basically, keep white people safe by watching black folk. Here's where the protecting interests of corporations comes in. In the North, policing started as private security for businesses that were hired to stop theft and prevent or suppress labor strikes and keep working class immigrants under control. So basically, after slavery ended, the South passed these things called black codes, and those criminalized really basic things like unemployment and minor offenses like standing around outside. And the police enforced these black codes, which turned people into criminals and allowed the state to do something called convict leasing, which is still happening today. I believe it's a story in is it Alabama? Where they're leasing prisoners into fast food restaurants and things like that. So you might actually have people working for free in some of your Burger Kings or McDonald's or something like that. And that is re-enslaving them to today, 2025. So it's funny because this system was never designed for public safety. Even in the North, when these businesses hired this private security, when the slaves were freed, they launched a campaign to convince the public that they needed to pay for this security because all of these slaves were now free, and these slaves presented a threat, the element to white society, and that they needed to pay taxes to make sure that they had this police presence to protect them from these newly freed slaves. But you're right, the original intent was to keep these businesses and these corporations safe, and that actually never went anywhere. So now we have a modernized police force that does both. They keep white people safe by watching black bodies, and they keep corporations safe from everybody by protecting property and doing revenue garnishment for the state. So today, black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by police, more so than any other demographic in the country. They are over-policed in their neighborhoods and disproportionately stopped and searched. Now, I say they. I am black, but I don't live in a predominantly black neighborhood. So, I don't see a lot of police. But when I drive over to the black side of town, all of a sudden the police presence ticks up very quickly. Then if you watch any of my other videos, you heard me talk about the 1033 program, where the police departments in the United States of America are granted a budget from our tax dollars that allows them to purchase excess military weapons, which allows the militarization of the police, where they use military weapons on American soil, on American citizens. However, these are typically used on marginalized communities and usually the ones who speak up in protest. So you've seen it, especially with Black Lives Matter. However, I was a part of the Occupy protest, and one thing that I did see when I was live streaming that was we would have a bunch of protesters out there, very peaceful, but pissed off, right? Because money in politics is pissing people off. And you'd have somebody usually one of these white hipsters, throw a water bottle at a riot-suited officer with all the, a riot shield and bulletproof vests and all of the things, and they would take that water bottle being launched at them as an excuse to subject hundreds of people to massive amounts of violence. I'm talking about tear gas, baton beatings, arrests, all type of things. So then in 2005, there was a court case, Castle Rock versus Gonzalez. And in this court case, a woman tried to, I believe she tried to sue the police because they didn't protect her. They didn't protect her when she tried to call them to enforce a court-ordered restraining order against her ex. And what ended up happening is he ended up killing her kids. And this is where the Supreme Court was like, yeah, the police have no constitutional, mandate to protect you. And that is wild because, we still pay for their services. So the modernized police that we see today is a combination of both the northern version of policing that protects businesses and the southern version of policing that protected basically white supremacy and revenue garnishment for the state. So we have that, but what we don't have as a citizenry is a police force that protects us, even in the case of emergency when we need some type of protection. We've seen this When people are like paying an extra fee for the police to respond, like if their house is being broken into and they have a house alarm. This happened to my mother one time in Oakland, California, where they said they simply didn't have enough resources to send somebody to her house while somebody was trying to do a home invasion while she was home and she had an ADT alarm. However, if they pulled over some black kids in a car and they had a speaker or whatever, they had 3 or 4 patrol cars to stop these, 1 or 2 kids to do a regular traffic stop. So, criminalization is often prioritized over protection of the citizens. So modern police is something that evolved from systems of racial and social and economic control. So understanding this helps us understand racial violence and disparities in enforcement and how they're not accidental. They're actually baked into the system. And, the Clintons actually, even though black people love to love them, are partially responsible for this because they actually made a deal with privatized prisons to keep these beds full. And how do you keep beds full? Like, how do you predict that you are going to be able to arrest enough people to keep the prison beds full? Unless you're manufacturing crime, unless you are actively targeting a particular demographic. Like Hillary Clinton came up and called black people super predators. Like, what the fuck is a super predator? And also Joe Biden, he was the Democratic elect's favorite, and, black people loved him aside Obama and voted for him again for 2 terms, but he was the whole reason for the 94 crime bill. And he also was the author of them having immunity, so while we often argue about this Democratic-Republican situation, like we're only a 2-party system in this country, Democrats have often done major damage to us by continually supporting police officers' unions and giving them more and more resources without changing the prioritization of the police departments to make sure that they would actually protect citizens instead of focusing on revenue garnishment and protection of corporations and property, and systematically and disproportionately attacking marginalized communities, primarily black.